Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our third session of our seed rematriation webinar series, Welcoming Seeds Home. My name is Meredith Burks and I'm the Communication Director here at Seed Savers Exchange. As you're logging in, we would love to hear where you're joining from. Go ahead and use the chat. And if you're using the chat on Zoom, just remember to change from all panelists to everyone so everyone can see it. I'm just going to go over a few brief housekeeping items before we dive in. We have only 1 hour together today, so we will not be taking questions from the audience. However, we are monitoring both the chat on YouTube and on Zoom. So we would love to hear your thoughts, your feelings, your ideas as the presentation and conversation unfolds. Also, the session is being recorded. So if you are watching the recording, thank you for coming to us later. And if you need to leave or just simply want to revisit the conversation at another time, it will be available on the Seed Savers Exchange Heritage Farm YouTube channel. And that is it. That is the little bit of housekeeping I needed to do. And I'm going to hand it over to our Director of Preservation, Phil Kauth, to help introduce our host and moderator today. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you everybody for joining us today. Appreciate it for our third webinar. Just for context, if you watched the other two, I like to intro this as saying Seed Savers Exchange was approached by Rowan White, founder of the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network, in 2017. Rowan is also the board chair at Seed Savers Exchange and a Mohawk seed keeper. And she approached us in 2017 about a partnership with Indigenous Seed Keepers Network to do rematriation work with each other. And the partnership has just blossomed into more than what we could have imagined from the get-go from our standpoint. Last year, we received a SARE grant, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education grant, partnership grant. And that particular grant had 3 partners on, and Shelley was one of them, along with Becky Webster and Jessica Greendeer. And this year that has expanded out to 8 partners. And now Meskwaki Food Sovereignty is again one of those partners on this grant. And like I said, Shelley was on the grant last year, and that's why she is here hosting today. So let me intro Shelley. Shelley is an enrolled member of the Meskwaki tribe and lives on the Meskwaki settlement with her 2 sons. The Meskwaki are unique in that their land-based community is a settlement, not a reservation. Established in 1857, with the purchase of 80 acres near Tama, Iowa, the Meskwaki settlement has grown to approximately 8,400 acres. Shelley joined Seed Savers Exchange for the 2021 growing season as a seasonal seed steward. She now works for Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, SILT, through the AmeriCorps Vista program. Her service assignment with SILT is to build capacity in farmer outreach in order to increase land access for socially disadvantaged farmers. Shelley served her community recently in coordinator roles at Red Earth Gardens and with the Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Initiative. She continues to advocate for food sovereignty and local foods through her personal consultancy, networks, and partnerships. She's an advocate for land-back Indigenous foodways, food justice, and rematriation. And I know this webinar has a special place for Shelley. So I'll kick it over to you, Shelley, and looking forward to it.
Thank you, Phil. Welcome to all of our listeners out there that have joined us today to learn about Meskwaki seeds and how we grow our food. Aspects of the Meskwaki culture as it relates to growing and gathering will be shared. I ask that you be mindful that we Meskwaki are protective of our culture for good reason. So in sharing with you today, we are entrusting that you will treat this knowledge with respect. Reciprocity means that you ask permission before you take, and you give something back in the taking. As you listen to this webinar, Please reflect on reciprocity and relationships rather than ownership, commodification, and profit from the gifts we are given by the seeds. Curb your enthusiasm to get your hands on some Meskwaki seeds. We've been through a lot to hang on to our seeds and our culture. The seeds are not objects to Indigenous folks. Thank you, Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Program, for taking the time to share your seed knowledge and your experience of this seed rematriation project. I introduce first Avis Bear-Bass, Youth Education Coordinator for Meskwaki Food Sovereignty. She provides educational opportunities through a traditional lens and is developing the Meskwaki Agriculture Club. Avis is a lifelong community culinary artist who cooks traditional foods and grows tribal and fresh produce. Christina Blackcloud, Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Coordinator, focuses on the overall food system of the Meskwaki Nation. She organizes the annual seed and transplant giveaway and has more recently turned her focus towards the Meskwaki Settlement School, where she has begun planning to incorporate tribal foods as taste tests and eventually as approved lunch items. As ancestral farming manager at Meskwaki Food Sovereignty, Luke Kapayou shares his knowledge and techniques of traditional Meskwaki farming, gathering, hunting, and fishing. He is responsible for 4 gardens: the Meskwaki Elders Garden, the Meskwaki Youth Garden, the Demonstration Garden, and the Programs Garden, as well as seed rematriation and growing out seeds for community use. Christina, would you give a brief overview of the Food Sovereignty Program?
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for taking a part in this webinar. Christina Blackcloud, I'm from the Meskwaki Nation, and I am the Food Sovereignty Coordinator. So the Food Sovereignty Program and Red Gardens was actually born back in 2010 with the idea of a community garden. And we had gained support of our local government, which is the Tribal Council, to make this a priority and initiative for the community here. So once this was done back in 2010, then we have Red Gardens, Food Sovereignty, and now today we offer a variety of services, which include a tilling service, beginner gardener guidance for our new gardeners, as well as, like she mentioned, was a seed and transplant giveaway. But we also do more than just that. The goals of food sovereignty in general is to establish that equitable and healthy food system for our community, empower and revitalize the Meskwaki cultural food practices, as well as to grow and steward an edible landscape. And a lot of different plans that have stemmed since 2010, including the seed library that we have here, incorporating little activities like our sugar maple camp here, making sure we have fresh produce for our youth at the school. We have a senior garden that provides fresh produce for not only the lunches at the senior center, but also for them to take home. And then we also have some individual plots that we till up just in case an individual does not have land or a space to grow their garden. We have spaces available for them. So we do a lot of different community outreach activities, as well as just trying to provide different educational opportunities to the general public regarding all these vast different legislation that's coming up, whether it's federal and state. So I want to touch a little bit on the history of the Meskwaki Nation as well. As it was mentioned, the tribe had purchased 80 acres back in 1857, and later on, it was held in trust by the state of Iowa. And then in the late 1800s, it was transferred over to the federal government. So that's why we're considered a settlement and not a reservation, as was mentioned. And we are still landowners at the end. Since the beginning, like late 1700s, there's been different federal Indian policy eras that has happened. which includes like the coexistent era, the removal era, the assimilation era, and all reorganization. And today we believe we're in the self-determination era of federal Indian policy. And we've seen a lot more support for tribal food systems, which involves with the USDA, with the Native American Agricultural Fund, which was some federal legislation where that provides funding support for different tribes. Just wanted to provide that little background, and it's been a long time coming to see where we are, where we're actually rebuilding our food structures within our tribal communities.
Thank you, Christina. Avis, your position, Youth Education Coordinator, is new. Would you share a project or two that you have in development for the Meskwaki youth?
Yes. This year is the planning year for an agriculture club for the K through 12 grades at the Meskwaki Settlement School. And so right now I'm working on getting the maple sugar camp back up. We had a storm that went through our settlement that kind of destroyed it. So we have to redo that and just planning out all that so we can get the kids involved. And actually what my plan is I want to have the kids camp there and go through the process and not just visit, for a class period. I want them to spend time there and see the work that goes into making maple syrup, collecting the sap and all that. And then also I'll be working on a youth garden with Luke. I think we're going to focus on corn and squash this year. I'm not sure yet, but we'll be doing that as well with the school.
Yeah, thank you, Avis. And yes, that immersion is really important. What you learn in a classroom or just by doing a tour doesn't really instill, the knowledge or the enthusiasm in kids, that immersion does. So I'm really excited to see how your work develops. And yeah, let me know if you need any help. I love sugar camp. I'm doing it right now. and I have 2 chainsaws too. So Luke, you have a slideshow to share, and we'll ask Meredith to get that up there on the screen. Hello, there's the team. Yay. Luke, do you want to just launch in and I'll
Yeah, well, here we are. This is what we look like. This was when we were visiting with Phil and Seed Savers up there in Decorah last summer. We had a good time there. What I want to talk about today is our growing methods and how we grow. And it's very simple how we do things. It's real basic planting, growing, cultivating, harvesting, very simple. Before I get into it, I wanted to tell you about the main difference, one of the big differences, and that's how we here and other indigenous people across America, South America, Central America, we look at the world differently than most people. The earth is very important to us. We are related to everything. Birds, animals, fish, rocks, everything. And when we grow, it's like, I can't find the words to use, but I want to start with go through the year, the months of the years. Like in January, that is a time when we get our seeds ready. We look at our corn and we select what seeds we're going to use. I brought some here to show everybody. This is one of our main corns that we grow here. This is a flint corn, and the ones we grew last year, we have some that are mostly white and they have some color. I'm going to show you another one here. This one has a lot of color with a little bit of white. So in the months of January and February is the time to be selecting your seeds. And what we do is we look for the nicest ears that we can find and pick out of the center. And here's another one that we grew last year, and this is a black corn. We grow, there's about 5 different types of flint corn that we grow here. And the main difference is a color. We also, this coming year, I think what we talked about in the youth garden, we're gonna grow a spotted corn. And our name for that one is Gadagigwa. We have Indian names, Meskwaki names for all of our seeds. And we'd like to get to the next slide. I think it's gonna show when we start planting. Yeah, this picture was in one of our gardens. We have community gardens that are available. If one of our families doesn't have the space to grow, we have 50 by 50 plots. We also have bigger plots if needed. But in this picture, we were helping a family grow for the first time. And like I say, we plant. It's very simple how we plant. Let's go ahead and look at the next 2 slides. These are a picture of my own garden that I keep. And in our garden, the whole family helps. And the way we plant is, if you see in that picture, we do use a string line and stakes. And usually a man, like it would be myself, or in the other picture, I have a son and a grandson with the hoe. We walk through and we make a hole, and then we take a big step and we make another hole. Take a big step and make another hole. And then we have women or girls do the planting. I've been told by my uncles, when I was growing up, I had 3 uncles. I grew up without a father, but I had 3 uncles and a grandfather. I was very lucky. They taught me a lot. And they told me that when you plant, men need to help, but let the women do the actual planting. If you let little girls do the planting or older women, they said that corn is gonna grow bigger. It's gonna grow better than if you plant it. So that's what we go by. Another thing we do is we wanna make sure we got the right spacing. So, and we've been doing this for several years. It always works. We plant about 2 feet apart. And when we put the corn seeds in there, they're put in 4 in each hole, and then they'll put 3 in the next. Those 4 will be in the shape of a diamond or a square, and then those next 3 will be a triangle. Then it'll go 4, 3, 4. And I never asked why we go 4, 3, 4. We just do it, and it always works. Let's go to the next slide. Usually right after we're done planting our corn, we plant our beans right after, usually the next day. In this picture on the left, you can see this young lady who's my youngest daughter. She's planting 3 pole beans, 3 climbing beans around each hole. So we grow 9 beans per pole. And those beans are put in there in a triangle and they're spaced apart. So you can see the whole 3 holes are like in a triangle, and then the beans are in a triangle inside there. And I was also told that when you plant pole beans, it's best to have young boys or young girls plant the beans if they are pole beans. And what she's doing in that picture is when she's putting those 3 beans in there, she's talking to them. She's telling those beans, "Kinasunga," and then she'll get 3 more. Then she'll say, "Kinasunga." And what that means is, I'm gonna beat you. I'm gonna beat you. And they say when the little kids talk to the beans and tell them that, that encourages those pole beans to climb up that pole as fast as they can. And this technique here is what we've been doing. And when I say we, I'm talking about myself and my family and the people I work with. We have other families that have other methods that are real close, but a little different. I have a good friend of mine who plants his beans first. And then after they sprout up and they start having runners, then he puts his poles in. But the way I do it, the poles are already in. And once the bean sprouts, they know where they're going to climb because they see it. And one of the reasons why we plant 3 in each hole, in that picture, you can see that after we planted, we had a rain. And then after the rain, the top of the soil kind of firmed up. So those 3 bean sprouts will help push up the dirt. And let's go to the next picture. Oh, this is a picture of this was back in May. That's my favorite time to go look for bean poles. And that's just a picture of some timber on the settlement overlooking the river. And the bean poles that we cut, we like using hickory because they usually grow nice and straight, and there's a lot of them. We're lucky that we have a lot of them. And in the timber where we cut them at, it's very thick in there. So a lot of those, some of those aren't gonna grow, they die from the shade. And then when we do cut them, we'll only cut maybe 1 or 2 out of one area, go over the hill, cut another 1 or 2. We don't get them all in the same place. And if we treat them right, take them out of the garden at the end of the year, we can use them again the next year. Let's see what the next slide is. On the left are some corn sprouts. Usually when we plant our corn, if you got good weather, they will sprout in about 4 days. So after 4 days, we like walking through the garden to see if they have sprouted. And when you see that, the reason I took that picture was that's what you want to see. When you see that, oh, it makes you feel good. Right? And you can talk to them. You can say, well, I usually say it in Meskwaki, but, oh, it's good to see you. There you are. Anything you want to. And what we do is we walk through the rows. make sure everybody has come up. Sometimes you see some that didn't. So then the next day you walk through again. You keep watching it. Every once in a while, there might be a place where they didn't come up, and you give them a little time, a little more time to come up. And if something has happened, like an animal got in or something, you can replant. And when you do that, when you replant, those ones that sprout a few days later, they will catch up with the other ones because they want to. You tell them to, and they will. And then this other picture with the little girls standing in the corn and the beans, that's probably taken in August, so a couple months after. And that just shows you that, you know, those beans did get thick. And one thing I wanted to mention too, when I talk to people, sometimes I know a lot of farmers. We live right in the middle of Iowa. One of the things we do a lot different is, one thing that we still doing is we use a plow and we do till, but we rotate our fields. We don't use the same field over and over again. And one thing I wanted to mention real quick, this picture reminds me that a lot of people, a lot of other tribes and other people are always asking me, oh, when I tell them what we grow, they always say, oh, you grow the three sisters. I hear this all the time. Yes, we do, but over here we don't call corn, beans, and squash the three sisters. We call it corn, beans, and squash. But if we had to come up with something like that, we would probably say, instead of the three sisters, we would say the four young men who were friends. Because in one of our stories, these seeds are our ancestors. And anyway, they were friends, young men who were friends, and they fasted, and they wanted a way to help our people. And what happened is one of them turned into corn, one of them turned into beans, and one turned into squash. And they gave us instructions how to grow them. And one of the first things they said was, "Kiwi gaji type." And what that translates to is, you treat us very carefully and respectfully. So that's what we do. That's another way how we look at things different. So when we grow the corn and beans and squash, we grow them together. We don't have the beans go up the corn, but we plant the beans beside the corn. And in this picture, on the other side of this garden, we have squash planted. And what happens is when that squash vines out, it'll go into the corn, climb over and through the corn, and the beans climb up their pole, and then they reach across and they climb into the corn. And sometimes those bean poles, they climb together and join up. It's awesome when that happens. But what they say is those beans, they try and tip your poles over. They want to get thick and they like to bend your poles. Let's see what the next slide is. Oh, that's a picture of some corn. And on the right is a picture of one of our beans that we call Biwa-Jitabi. And that's a bush bean. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Okay, and then want to talk about our pole beans. We're growing about 6 different types of native Meskwaki pole beans. This is one of them. And I took this picture because in this picture, it shows you what they look like when they're ready to pick. When beans are ready to pick, they're ready to be picked. You need to go be out there and start picking them. Some of these, like this one here, if you have a storm or you got rain coming, if they move around, they can break open. So you need to, treat them carefully and pick them before that happens. Let's see the next picture. Oh, this is a close-up of that same bean. And our name for that one is Papagwesua. And what that means is it wrinkles when it's cooked. Okay, let's see the next slide. On the left, we pick some beans, and sometimes when you're picking them, they might feel a little damp. And we go ahead and lay them out and let them dry in the sun for about a day. It doesn't hurt. But when we do that, we dry them in the shell. And in that picture, you can see in the background, that was our demonstration garden. In the front, there's a squash. Then you can see bean poles and then corn in the back. If we were going to grow in that same garden next year, we would put the corn where the squash was and put the squash where the corn was, just reverse it. And then in this other picture, you can see our young ladies taking corn out of a kettle that's just been harvested when it was green. When we harvest our corn, we harvest it 2 times. The first time is when it's green, and that's when we harvest most of it. And what we do is we husk it, and then we boil it for about 10 minutes, maybe 15. And then we shell it by hand, and then we dry it. And when we dry it, we just lay it out in the sun. And it takes about 4 days. Let's see what the next slide is. Oh, that's corn boiling in a kettle. Yeah. Let's see what the next one is. Oh, there's a squash that's been picked. And this is a type that we grew last year. And this is one that we probably grew a long time ago, but recently we traded with our Kickapoo relatives from Oklahoma. And their name for this one is Wishkup Wabigun. And that just means sweet squash or sweet pumpkin. Oh, I got some here beside me that's dry. Oh, excuse me. Let me show you real quick. Here's a handful. Now this is dried. We just cut that up in strips and then hang it up and let it dry. And it's very, very easy to do. Let's see the next slide. Oh, that's another squash that we grew last year. And that's one of our native heirlooms. It's called, most people call it kusha. We call it babagua. And I was doing some research one time, long time ago, and I read somewhere that some archaeologists found seeds, this type of seeds growing next to the Mississippi River. And I think they said 3,500 years ago. And I thought, well, that's amazing. Yeah, let's see what the next slide is, or maybe we're done. Oh, this is our second harvest. And this is after the corn is dried on the cob. And our ladies did a real good job of braiding those up. And that was a picture I took before we hung them up. All right, do we have any more slides there? Oh, I guess that was it. But I think that's all I got for right now.
Thank you, Luke. I do have a couple of questions for you. For one, would you talk a little bit about the names for, well, some Meskwaki beans? Like, you know, just to give folks kind of an idea of, I think it reflects how we see our seeds as relatives, as beings,
Yeah.
rather than objects.
Okay. Yeah, we have one of the beans we grow. It's a red cranberry bean. And I have heard that bean is, you know, could be one of the oldest beans in existence. And our name for that bean is Agusia. And what that means is lumpy body climber. Another bean that we have that's one of our favorites, and it's a red climbing bean. And our name for that one is Meskwaki Agusia. And that translates to red-faced climber. Another bean would be a bush bean that's white. And I think the closest thing that's compares to that one is they call it a white case knife bean. But the one we have is named Wabeshki Guad Chitabia. And that means white-faced cedar. Let's see, another one is another pole bean that's called Bagashadia, and that means smoky rear or smoky butt. And and then there's that other one that we've seen a picture of. It's, let's see, Papagwesua, and that's a lima bean. And that means wrinkled when cooked. And just lately, we had a donation from out east, and very excited about that. It's a black pole bean, and we were missing our black pole bean, and we've got it back now. And they have a name for that one. It's a longer name. It's Negya Makade Asen. And what that means is my mother's black stones. So this year we're going to be growing that out for seed. And we're also going to have enough seed to have other people around here help us grow it up for seed too. And then in our corn, we've got they're very basic names. They're Makadasid, Wabeshkasid, Bashkosid, and those are black, white, and red. And then we also have Gadaki Igwa, and that's spotted face. But I think that's about most of them that I know.
Is there a bean that's named Spotted Belly?
Oh, yeah, there is. You're right. And actually, that one is one that we don't have. There's some in a Chicago Field Museum and some in a museum in New York. And that one's Spotted Belly, Gatakeja. And that's one that we're looking for to rematriate. What's special about that bean is a lot of tribes have white beans that will have black spots or black markings. Some have white beans that have red spots or red markings. This is a bean that's a white bean that has red and black markings on it. So that's, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's interesting to me is that, it's, some of these beans in their names, they have faces and they have bellies. They even have, rear ends.
Yeah.
So it's descriptive names, spotted or red or white or sitting, or climbing. But at the same time, it's also names that recognize, once again, that these seeds are beings rather than objects, which is, I just find really beautiful in the naming. And I see in the chat a few questions. Somebody did have a question about how do you plant the squash?
We plant in hills, just real small hills. I mean, not very high, I mean, maybe like 4 inches. And in each hill, we'll plant 4 and space them out about as wide as your fingers, like in the shape of a square or a diamond. And then you need to give them space because they vine out a lot. So at least 10, 15 feet from your edge of your garden. And like I was saying before, we like it when they grow into the corn. But when they grow out the other way, what we do is when that vine starts going out where you didn't want it to go, you just carefully pick the end up and you point it back into the garden and you tell them, we want you to go back that way, okay? You just ask them and they do that and they'll go back again. We plant in small hills because you don't want your seed too deep in the ground, especially if you get water, you can drown them. You can drown squash seeds. So that's why we put them in a hill.
Yeah, Luke, and there's one other question about green corn. Like, let me scroll back to that really quick. What does green corn mean for corn? Or what does green mean for corn, right? And then how do you know when it's ready for harvest?
Well, what that means is it's fresh and ready to eat, ripe for eating. And in our corn, what we do is we keep track of when we plant. It takes ours about 78 days till it's ready. So we keep an eye on it. So when that time comes, we go check on the corn every now and then. Sometimes, depending on the weather, might be sooner or a little bit later. And then when it does get ripe, you have about 1 week to pick it while it's ripe. And that's what green corn is.
Mm-hmm. I mean, once again, that's the corn that is boiled and then dried. And then it takes a lot of water to rehydrate it, but you cook it until it's soft for chewing again.
Shelley,
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to point out that they're asking about green corn. The corn isn't green. It's just when the plant is still green is what he's talking about, that period. And then the second part is when the corn is dry, when it's seed. So it's not actually green corn.
Yeah, thank you. That helps a lot. Yeah.
We know when the cobs are ready, when of course the corn is milky in a sense, and if it gets back, as you gets to a dried stage, it's too far for us to process. But there's different, ways we process the corn. It's just not from the green corn, but there's a lot of different ways that we can cook with it. So.
Yeah, for Avis, there's a question about the dried squash. What's a favorite preparation?
We make something we call dugwahan. It's kind of like dried squash. Oh, dried squash. Yeah. We just make it the same way we would if we had fresh squash. We make it like kind of like a puree.
Sure. And add a little sweetener.
Yes.
Do you add any fat or anything else?
yes, we add deer fat. Some people use other stuff like bacon grease or something, but that's normally how I do it. I put it in at the beginning, and then at the end, that's when I add the sweetener. And lately I've been using the traditional maple syrup because I noticed that it has a better taste than brown sugar or sugar.
Mhm.
So that's just how I do it personally though.
And it's our food, maple
Yeah.
syrup, and instead of brown sugar, and it's better
And-
for us. Yeah.
And sometimes we also add like the red beans or the green beans or corn to it.
Mhm. Any other cooking questions out there? Now that we have Avis, our go-to. So I want to, we've got a little bit less than 15 minutes, and I do want to give Christina and Avis more a chance to talk about what they do. I do want to ask Luke really quick though, in the early 2000s, you donated seed to Seed Savers Exchange. What drove this decision, and how have things changed since then?
Well, the reason I did that was back then, it seemed like a lot of the older people we were losing them. They were passing away. And some of them were the ones that were doing a lot of growing. And it seemed at that time, there were fewer growers too, like the younger families. And it seemed like the families that were growing seemed like a lot of them were growing corn only and less squash and less beans. And at that time, I just, I thought it would be a good idea to, if somebody else had a seed bank so they could save them. So in case we ever lost them, because I know how easy it is to lose a certain type of seed or a certain type of bean. And then shortly afterwards, this food sovereignty started over here. And then I started donating to food sovereignty after that. And there are more growers again now. And right now it looks a lot better than it did back then. But we are missing, those people, older people that were here growing.
Mhm. And for Christina, you helped get the food sovereignty program started in 2010 when you were executive director. In fact, if I remember right, this really was part of your dream to start that community garden. So, and now you're food sovereignty coordinator, which I feel like is kind of coming full circle. So just, you want to share any kind of like thoughts about that experience of being able to now come fully into this program that you really were integral in getting going? And that's what made the difference, why we don't have to worry about losing our seeds, right? Is this program.
Yeah, so, especially some of our earliest memories are being in the garden. And that definitely was mine when we used to live down by the original 80 acres as a child. Going into my grandpa used to take care of a garden. All I seen was just a large field of corn. That's what I remember as a kid. And as I worked in the historic preservation area for a while, actually, I delved into our history quite a bit and all these things that have been happening to our tribe here and how our food was affected in different ways. For example, there is where our tribe, our story originates from north of New York, and here we're in Iowa. And we're still within the same biosphere. We could still, understand, we could still grow our food the way we did within this biosphere. But as a young person in my 20s in historic preservation, I was amazed with our history and everything. And then I was like, well, I want to learn how to, do a lot of different things that we used to do, and that's growing. And my earliest memories are being in the garden and everything. And I was like fielding around when I was in historic, I was just like, how about if we get a community garden? You think that's doable? And I kept asking people as they were walking around, like tribal leaders in our tribal building. And then eventually they're like, well, we'll give it a try. And our public works department cleared out an area across from Highway 30. And it's like, well, give it a try. And I did not give it a try at that time because I got caught up with school, the internships that I've had and all that kind of stuff. So when I came back as executive director, that idea was still in my head because I'm so proud of us, of who we are and how we're still thriving today. And get in the community, get in the garden as a major focus for our food system here. That's not how I worded it at all. I want us to have access to fresh food. We have a grocery store that's more than 5 miles away. We need access here on the settlement for fresh produce. So all these different thoughts are going through my head of what we can do. So as executive director, that was one of the main projects for our economic development director at that time. And even then, one of the main projects within that was having our elders garden. I said, this is your first, this is the first project. So that was actually our local foods planner at the time. Her first project was focusing in on our elders garden. And to be able to see how, this program has taken off from just an idea planted in by being so proud of who we are as tribal people, and to be able to, see it go to the next step, each level higher and higher, and actually have a tribal farm, have an educational avenue for our people to be able to learn about the different tribal names, to learn about the different foods we used to eat, how we cook the foods and everything like that. So it was a good opportunity that I found that positively affected our tribal community here.
Well,
I just feel like, within our community, there's like several people that we have farmers, we just don't call ourselves farmers, we call ourselves small gardeners, but yet our fields are kind of big, so we don't see ourselves even as farmers. We're just like gardeners. That's what we do.
Yeah. And I know we're getting close on time here. I do want to go into how is this rematriation partnership helping to grow more Meskwaki growers?
So I know that's one of our major focuses is like growing more growers, growing more fishermen, growing more harvesters, just the overall food system. It's just not seeds, it's food in general, whether it's hunting, fishing, gathering, foraging, and growing food. So it's all combined in there, but the seed maturation, it allows us to have a time to focus in on why saving our seeds are so important. Having a seed library within our program here, as well as being able to share that knowledge, the tribal knowledge, and making sure they're continuing on if it's not available anywhere else within families and everything. So
yeah,
I just find it like really exciting, the road that food sovereignty has taken, our Red Earth Gardens, our organic farm that we're taking, the educational approach with that area, just to make sure we're growing more farmers with our seed maturation. It's exciting because we get to focus in on what it is and how it benefits the community of making sure our seeds come home and they continue on.
Mm-hmm. And then for our listeners, and any of you three can chime in about ways that I guess the general public can support seed rematriation and food sovereignty efforts, right? There's a lot of folks that kind of, in previous webinars, I saw people being like, how can we get these seeds? And that's why in the beginning of this webinar, I wanted to remind people that like, hey, we've had to, fight pretty hard to keep our seeds in our culture. So don't be so eager to want to take from it, right? So instead of taking, like, what are some ideas to give people how they can support this?
So what I'm thinking is what's been really helpful for our program since it's growing, and we're learning more about seed saving and the soil health and all that. So what I appreciate from others wanting to support our efforts and everything are donations into the program itself. And you can find that link on meskwaki.org or info@meskwaki-nsn.org. And you could just like, hey, I want to donate, and that will get connected to us. Otherwise, you could always just contact us on Facebook or wherever our information, I don't know if it's on here, our information is. So that way, if you want to support us in that way, that would be really helpful, because we do appreciate the support. So that way we can buy the necessary tools, buy the necessary equipment and everything like that. If we're going to have different activities within our community that take supplies, it's just like a whole bunch of different things, especially when we have our community meals. We do need supplies to, buy the utensils and all that kind of stuff, or it's just different things like that. I think that would be really helpful. I know we're lucky and fortunate that we received a Native American Agricultural Fund grant. That's how we were able to focus in on our youth area with Avis here. So there's different avenues of how financial support is helpful. So that way we can focus on different areas in the food system.
Yeah, and especially like for those community meals, compostable utensils and plates, containers are more expensive than plastic and styrofoam. So, there's all kinds of different ways that money coming in can help support, for instance, sustainability and being, more of a responsible when having your events. So we're just about, we've got about 2 minutes left. And I know that we had one more question about how does seed rematriation and food sovereignty initiatives help Indigenous communities to overcome a scarcity mindset? I think that our tribal historian, Jonathan, one thing that he emphasized is like, yes, all of our, our seeds and our foods are sacred. They are sacred. They are also food. That's why they came to us to feed us. And so sometimes folks think of these foods as to only be saved for ceremonial purposes. So what are some of the ways that, you're helping, to people to overcome that, to get them to eating it as more of a daily practice?
So I think you have to overcome that scarcity mindset of being a sacred food, I guess. I just want to scale it back into, growing food is challenging. There's a lot of labor into it. So oftentimes people do not grow enough food, so that way it's not a normal part of their everyday diet, right? And the only time some people have access to it is as ceremonies or something similar, or even at community meals. Maybe that's the only time they get it, when we provide it. But that's why we're trying to grow more growers. So there is not that scarcity mindset. You have the ability to control your own food, and you could actually grow this food and learn how to cook it. And that's where our program, is very beneficial to the community here, and being able to rematriate different foods that we don't currently have in our food system here. It's really helpful. I mean, we were so excited when we received notice about that bean from out east. We're like, yes. And then we finally got it. We got to see it. And we're just like, yes. So that way we could have another bean variety within our community. So that way it'll become a normal part of the diet here. And I realize, there's a lot of different challenges that we're facing here, not just within our tribal community, but on the state level. We have CAFOs over here. We have a lot of pesticides going in. We're in Iowa. We're surrounded by farms. That infiltrates into our food system. That goes into our river. That affects our fish over there. There's so many different things. So being able to understand and have a baseline of our soil health here, for our community is so important, but that's just not our responsibility. That's our responsibility as Iowans, as a responsibility as citizens of this America, as for the world. You know, that's climate change. It is like, it all starts with having that responsibility, holding that responsibility, personal responsibility, and being able to help and educate others so that way they grow that responsibility as well. So when you think about challenges and making sure our food system grows, make sure it stays here, it's so important that we partner up with different organizations such as Seed Savers, right? Because we're all talking about the same subjects, and we all have different networks where we can share this education too.
Yeah, yeah. And thank you for taking that, you know, from the personal scale to, you know, the, what is it, meta, you know, and
That's how I talk. I'm like, it's this, but you know, it's the whole world.
yeah, yeah. It's everybody's responsibility, you know. Well, we're at time. Thank you, Luke and Christina and Avis, for joining us today on this webinar, and all of our audience. Yeah, it's a beautiful day out. Go enjoy some sunshine if you're in Iowa. And for the rest of you, take care.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Avis. Thank you, Shelley. This was really awesome. Next week, we have another, our fourth webinar coming up with Jessica Greendeer and Phoebe Young from Dream of Wild Health. So stay tuned for that, and hope to see you back here next week.
Right.
Thank you, everybody.